Hello, I'm Andria Olson, and I'm a map librarian at Brenner Earth Sciences Library and map collections at Stanford University. Along with this, I've been filling in as the coordinator for our MAPS digitization program. And because of this, I've had the great honor and privilege of working with a really dynamic, talented group of people. But a wrench was thrown into the gears of our team on March 16th when the shelter-in-place order was announced. Without access to the physical maps and digitization lab, our intense commitment to digitizing any map out of copyright was brought to a standstill, and our focus shifted to optimizing the remote experience for working, teaching, and learning. With a seemingly endless stream of maps to be carefully digitized by a limited staff, we experienced love at first sight day in and day out, only to never have enough time to really bask in those feelings. But with routine standing still, we suddenly found ourselves with time to lose ourselves in the details of the maps we had been so diligently digitizing for years, time to figure out how we could share our privilege with the world in a way that spoke to our interests. Spotlight is an application for creating digital exhibits that can not only be shared with your communities, but also the world, and it became the medium for this endeavor. Cartographic Symbologies, the art and design of expression in historic maps. The maps viewable in this exhibit are personal favorites, and the symbologies highlighted are those that made our hearts skip a beat. Because we are continuously inspired by the details found in these maps, we wanted to make it easy for others to also be inspired. Our goal was to create a lookbook experience for browsing maps based on symbologies and other elements that we find intriguing and are convinced others will too. A major component of this exhibit are the curated features created by members of our MAPS digitization team. The task was to pick a theme or topic of interest and share it in their way. We will hear from two of these individuals further along in this presentation, but the full list of contributors is as follows. Intimate Mapscapes by David Medeiros, Directional Indicators by Peter Crandall, Folklore and Myth by Meagan Trott, Illustrating History by myself, and Depicting the Landscape with an additional feature on Legends by Chris Hacker. Our intent was to create approachable, quick learning opportunities from many perspectives so that a variety of learning styles and levels feel welcome in our exhibit. It is our hope that this exhibit will contribute to and further the tradition of using historic maps for creative inspiration and research. So the first curated feature we're going to highlight is Intimate Mapscapes by David Medeiros, who, as we've already learned, is the geospatial reference and instruction specialist for the Stanford Geospatial Center located within Brenner Library. Along with this work, David also leads the efforts for creating digital indexes for our large sets of digitized maps. For his curated feature, David drew on his experience in cartography and photography to make comparisons between maps and the physical world that surrounds us. So now I'm going to play a recorded discussion that David provided us.
Hi, everyone. So for my part of this exhibit, I wanted to look at intersecting two crafts I spend a fair amount of time with, cartography and photography. And specifically, if my knowledge of photography could be used to drive an exhibitive imagery taken directly from old maps. Like a lot of you, I collect maps in different forms. I've been following the Maps at Home hashtag online closely over the past few months. Special thanks to Ken Field for keeping that feed well stocked with beautiful imagery and everyone else. I also collect map resources, styles, colors, and symbols digitally liberated from old maps, and then occasionally reinvent them as new non-map narratives. I call this scene regret, or sometimes the forlorn travelers. It's just a mashup of illustrations taken from an Ortelius map, courtesy of the David Rumsey Map Center. But it's a good example of how rich old maps can be in assets for new work, both in terms of the styles they represent, color palettes, symbology, but also illustrations. In my photographic work, I do much the same thing, take images out of context and isolate them in a way that I hope gives them a new narrative. I tend to focus on simple compositional methods with narrow fields of view. This helps isolate subjects from recognizable context. Composition in photography follows a lot of the same best practices for layout and visual hierarchy in map making. And so it occurred to me this might be an interesting way to look at maps as well, to take the concepts I use in photography around composition and narrative and apply them to map landscapes instead of real ones. I skimmed our collection of scanned historic maps and found that it was really quite easy and a lot of fun to make landscape images from them. Most of this is just about what looks good to me, but I'm also paying attention to the same compositional rules I'd follow in photography: leading lines, visual flow, centering, isolation, and narrow fields of view. And then in the final step, I've added real images from my own work that parallel the map scenes to create the map image pairs from the exhibit. The images hopefully following the same compositional rules that I applied to the map croppings. As cartographers, we do a lot of this naturally as part of our own layout and visual balance process for new maps, but I suspect in the rush to production, we're probably missing a lot of the small scenes we create along the way. And that's the real point here, to highlight something that I think is deeply embedded in the work that we do, but often goes unnoticed. I'm gonna keep adding to my set for this experiment. I have a whole bunch of maps from our collections queued up and ready for me to explore and extract new scenes from. But I'd also love to see what other map makers come up with in finding scenes to pull out of their own favorite maps. So feel free to experiment with the work that I started here, and please share online. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, David. The second curated feature that we're going to highlight for this presentation is Depicting the Landscape by Chris Hacker. Chris is a member of the Stanford Library's digital production group, which specializes in the imaging and digitization of a broad range of materials to include maps and atlases. Along with this work, Chris also has a background in geology. For their curated feature, Chris and 12-year-old research assistant Olivia Diaz drew on this background to highlight and share the oftentimes overlooked beauty of highly technical maps such as military topographic maps and nautical charts. In the spirit of encouraging all ages and learning levels to explore historic maps, Olivia has narrated the following presentation of their curated feature.
Beautiful and historically significant maps and charts, such as these from the David Ramsey Map Collection at Stanford, are regularly featured in museums, articles, and exhibits of all kinds. Beyond being merely informational, many are great, enduring works of art and design. There is beauty, artistry, and much historical interest too in what would be considered mundane, technical, and primarily practical maps at the time of their production, such as military topographic maps and reference and planning maps. Chris was inspired by the sometimes tedious work of digitizing these maps, which involves looking very closely at them, and thus inevitably noticing interesting details that are easily missed at a glance. We aim to celebrate the easily overlooked beauty and historical geographical interest hidden in these maps, with the hope that others will be inspired to explore maps collections like this in a way that one might casually explore on Google Earth or Wikipedia. There are many hidden treasures to be found. The Depicting the Landscape section of Cartographic Symbologies specifically looks at how terrain and landscapes are graphically depicted in these kinds of maps in Stanford's collections, from very broad 16th and 17th century depictions that give you just a general sense of the landscape. Through the 19th century, where mapping became more precise and, in particular, the need for accurate nautical charts greatly expanded. And then into the early 20th century, military and government maps that were collected from all over the world following World War I by what was originally known as the Hoover War Library at Stanford, founded by Stanford alum and U.S. President Herbert Hoover. And then continuing, through the 20th century as mapping technologies rapidly improved both during and after World War II. Through these maps, one can follow diverging and converging philosophy and artistic and technical thought by countless mapmakers the world over. Especially when grouped together, you can see the experimentation and ingenuity through the decades and centuries that ultimately converged into the modern map standards of the late 20th century that we use today. The exhibit takes many detours to explore some of these different threads and looks at maps designed for particular purposes or made under special conditions that led to unusual and interesting depictions and descriptions of landscapes. And some maps created with purely artistic intent. The effects of colonialism and war, both physically and in how ideas are spread, are often apparent in the maps in Stanford's collections in particular, many of which are military maps originating from Hoover collections. This presentation has been something of a visual deluge of maps because the exhibit itself features so many that it was so difficult to choose just a few favorites to go into detail with here. So please check out the full exhibit, which I helped Chris organize and make accessible for young people like me. Thank you.
Another curated feature and a large component of this exhibit are cartographic extractions. Historic maps have long been inspiration for creators across many artistic disciplines, and we wanted to contribute to the continuation of this tradition in some way. Throughout this exhibit, we highlight and dissect the tiniest of details found within maps out of curiosity and wonder, so it only felt right to then extract just a few of our favorite details and provide downloadable files for free. After compiling a small collection of abstractions, our science and geospatial metadata librarian, Kim Durante, made our dreams come true by accessioning this new content to our digital repository and creating records for each item, now viewable in our online catalog SearchWorks. Another large component were our browse categories. The magic of maps is that they hold tokens of treasure for everyone, whether you're a history buff, graphic designer, geology nerd, artist, gamer, or anyone else in between. A key component of this exhibit is our browse categories, where we have gathered many maps based on the symbologies or elements found within them. After compiling just a few of our favorite maps, we began adding metadata tags to each map to divide them into a set of granular categories for quick and easy viewing. As many of you are painfully aware, the longer you look at a map, the more you see. We began with 10 granular categories and ended with 35. And in closing, I'm just going to highlight quickly a few of these browse categories that we created, and I thank you for listening and giving us the time here.
Andrea, thank you so much, and thanks to your teammates as well. I hope you'll pass on our appreciation of their contributions to your work.
Of course.